You're probably admiring this beautiful and functional website for the Kristen Sellentin brand, but I wanted to back up a little bit and show you how we got to this place. Kristen's project is a fun one to go behind the scenes in because it spans the entire brand formula. We started with clarity and her personality items during her brand intensive week, and then we worked on her connection with her audience through building out this beautiful website that you're seeing on the screen. So let's back up to how we actually got to this amazing website. The collaboration between Kristen and Olive Fox actually looked more like this. We kicked off her brand intensive week on a clarity call. This is where my former auditor skills come in handy. I asked Kristen all of the right questions to get down to the essence of her brand. After we got off of our Zoom call, then I started working on her brand strategy and direction document. As you can see from Kristen's table of contents, her brand strategy and direction ended up being 20 pages, and the organization of this is key. First, we start out with discussing her people, starting first with her leader profile, then defining her audiences, then getting a little bit more specific and talking about more of the general traits of those audiences, and then assigning a very specific persona to each of those. And then from there, the walkthrough of how that person will interact with her brand. I know you're here for a real peek behind the curtain, so I'll show you a bit about her overview of her audiences. So this is really defining her audiences. And in Kristen's case, she has two audiences that she's talking to. Her primary audience are her content consumers and those that she's interacting with on a day-to-day basis. They're real people, just like you and me. These are the people who are going to be taking action on her content. So actually performing the DIYs or filling their bookshelves with her age-appropriate and seasonal suggestions. This is where some brand designers who don't have the extensive business background might stop. However, it's really important that as we were building Kristen's brand, we weren't leaving out an entire audience that she's trying to reach. To capture the more business side of things, we built out a secondary audience, and this is the brand representatives. These are the people that she wants to make the deals with and will have the more business type relationship with. After we've done that deep dive into Kristen's people, then we shifted gears into discussing more of her brand. So in order to figure out how she stands out, we first start with a competitor analysis. This section really puts me back in business school doing competitor analysis, but it has a little bit of a different spin here because I'm also analyzing their visual brands as we go forward. And this really launches us into the meat of Kristen's brand. So her standout, her brand values, some of the descriptors and keywords, and her brand positioning. The peek behind the scenes for this section are Kristen's brand values. This one was particularly fun because we got to work a little bit more in depth to specifically define these. I keep my onboarding for clients incredibly simple. So before hopping on our clarity call, the only thing is a 10 to 15 minute logistics questionnaire. And that covers things like, how do you spell your name? Are there any preferences that I should know about? Do you have defined brand values? On her design logistics questionnaire, she indicated that she wanted to spend more time defining these. So I sent over a brand values workbook that she was able to spend some time with. And then on our clarity call, we dedicated a good amount of time to really defining and getting everything down to these 4 values. Being realistic, approachable, cheerful, and hardworking are just such a great encapsulation and capture Kristen's essence and act as a guiding light for all of her future decisions. The final section of the brand strategy and direction pivots away from the verbal descriptors and the foundation that we've built, and it goes into the visual direction of the brand. In Kristen's case, I presented 2 different concept directions, and these really focus on the color, typography, and tone of her brand. Both of these are supported by all of the brand strategy that we did beforehand, but yet there are different aspects that we're playing up in each one. On day 2, when I presented this entire document, as well as both of these design directions, we talked thoroughly about what it would mean to go into each direction, and Kristen decided that we would lean into concept 2 with a few modifications. With this clear foundation of who we're talking to, Kristen's brand, and now a visual direction, then I actually started on the sketching and designing. Thursday morning, Kristen got access to her initial concept. Out on her portal, the very first thing is a 16-minute long video, and this talks all about the design decisions that we made for her brand. So a lot about the typography, customizations we made, things like that nice curvature on the L mirrored with the K, going into things in her stacked logo, like the alignment of the R going down into the L, Things like when she zooms in on her star asterisk, it's actually two Ks put back together, back to back. So just all of these little details like that might not immediately jump out. I like to record a video to really highlight all of those items. Below the initial concept in 2D, it also discussed things like her application mock-up, which is such a fun thing where it really starts to bring the brand to life. It's one thing to see the brand assets in 2D just against different color backgrounds, but it's quite another to see an actual mock-up, in her case with an image of her son, kind of as what a newsletter might look like. After Kristen had a bit of time to digest everything, then we hopped on a refinement call and we discussed any changes that she wanted to make. One of the refinements that we discussed was a change to the color palette. We discussed the few different areas that we could lean into from her brand strategy. What we landed on was leaning a little bit more into the feminine and softer tones. I jumped back into the design software and made the edits and refinements that we discussed. And then Kristen and I hopped back on another call and made sure that she was perfectly happy with the refined concept. Once Kristen gave me her finalization, I did just that. I worked on saving out all of her final files for her logos and the patterns and all of the designed assets, as well as building out her brand manual. As you can see, the brand manual covers everything in the brand formula. So the items that we solidified in the beginning half of the week under clarity, then the visual designed items under personality, and then I give some forward-looking suggestions for the connection items. One big part of this connection section is the website, but because I was doing the designing for that, I didn't actually include any suggestions within here. We just dove into the website design process. It'll be a surprise to nobody that the website process starts off with a strategy and direction. So first we go over the visual elements. Even though we just wrapped up the brand intensive, it's always good to just make sure we're on the same page, and it goes a little bit more in depth from the perspective of a website. So certain things like typography are a little bit different on the website than they would be if you were just putting together something in Canva. And the second half of this document goes into the design scope. Arguably the most important of those is going to be defining the user actions. And that's because we don't want to make a site that's just pretty. It also needs to be incredibly functional. In Kristen's case, her primary users, as we discussed before, are content consumers. So we want the primary goal of her website to make it easy for them to consume her content. Along with defining these actions, then I also go into some suggestions of how we can meet those goals. So for this primary item, one example is about the navigation and making sure it's incredibly easy for people to navigate around on her site. And that is a combination of the designed items on the front end and the back end infrastructure. Within the design scope, we also go into the sitemap, the navigation, and additional services. One of the additional services for Kristen's website was connecting her LTK account so that at the end of her posts, it's all integrated right there with her affiliate links. After making sure Kristen and I were on the same page with the direction, then I dove into designing her top 3 pages. So in addition to designing her header and footer, I also presented her homepage, her about page, and her blog pages for an initial review. After Kristen had a chance to review these items, there were no major changes, so we used that same look and feel and built out the remainder of her website. I'm going to dive into a few of my favorite features from Kristen's website. First is that navigation. We talked about this before in the strategy, but I just love the way that the header came through on both the desktop with that bigger visual field that you get to work with, and then as well on the mobile, that drop down. Both of them are just beautiful and also easy to navigate. Another item that I love is the incorporation of the animations. Kristen gave me the green light that she loves this little pop, and it's a very important thing that when animations are done, they're done in the right way. They can get cheesy really quickly, or they can be a really big distraction and make people turned off of a website. So on Kristen's website, we were really intentional on where we were putting these and how they were coming through. One of my favorites is the scrolling effect when you are on the About page, and how over the get to know each of Kristen's kids, the titles curve over. So you're drawn into the titles and you're not too distracted to read the bigger chunk of text. Another highlight is Kristen's links landing page. So instead of sending all of her traffic to a third-party site like a link in bio or Linktree, we want to make sure that we're keeping that on her domain. So we set this up so that it's within her own website. We also simplified it. So instead of having to scroll endlessly for discount codes and search for what you want, we split those out into a separate page so that it's easy to navigate. This separate discounts page is also a fun one for me because on the back end, using the power of WordPress, I was able to create an entire second feed. These are all input with some custom coding set up on the back end, so they're easy to navigate, easy to sort. You can tag them and they're searchable, which is really important, especially for something like the discount codes. I, of course, have to include Kristen's blog. I love the incorporation of the submark, the KS blog, as well as the way that this is presented and laid out. So we started with the featured image, making sure that that is exactly as it sounds like. It is a featured image. Kristen has a beautiful photography style that tells stories on its own, so making sure that that is up front and center. At the bottom of specific posts, you can see the Shop LTK integration, which is great because then people can find exactly the items or resources that she mentioned and shop those links really easily in a very visual way. Then down below, everything after you've left a comment. Down here at the bottom, I love this what to read next section. This is great because the back end is set up so that this is dynamically pulling. So as Kristen adds more content onto her site, these suggestions will get a lot more narrow and they'll all be related to the article that you're reading. Thank you for joining me on this recap of Kristen's journey from our initial clarity call all the way through her website launch. I'd love to hear what you think about the process and the final product. Send me a message on Instagram at olivefoxdesign or send me an email at hello@olivefoxdesign.com.